What's the most disrespectful thing a teacher ever did to you? My teacher ripped my cochlear implant off my head, and the second she did, everything went silent. And I stood there frozen while the classroom moved in blurry silence around me. See, I've been deaf since I was born, but when I was 9, my parents got me cochlear implants. They don't fix everything, but they help me function in places where no one knows sign language. At home, we sign, but at school, I rely on those implants to hear lectures, group work, and hallway noise because without them, the world just goes dark and hollow. Yesterday, I wore a beanie to keep my CI transmitters in place, which I've done 100 times, and my regular teachers know what it is, and they understand how I learn. But we had a substitute that day, and she didn't know anything, and she saw something by my ears and assumed I was hiding headphones. She marched straight over and told me to take them off or she'd write me up for breaking the rules, and I stayed calm, took off my beanie, and showed her the devices, and I told her they were cochlear implants, and I even explained how they help me hear, but she didn't even look at them. She just squinted like she didn't believe me and called it a pretty weak excuse. I told her again they were medical devices, and I told her as clearly as I could that I was deaf, and these were how I stayed in the conversation, but she rolled her eyes and walked away, and I thought that was the end of it. But a few minutes later, I felt movement behind me, and before I could even turn, she reached forward and yanked both implants off my head, and I froze because my hearing was just gone, and my hands were shaking. I jumped up, heart pounding, and yelled at her to stop, but I had no idea how loud I was because I couldn't hear myself, and I reached to grab them back, panicked, not thinking about anything but getting them out of her hands before she broke them or lost them. She screamed that I'd attacked her, and I shouted back that she took my hearing, and the whole class went silent. Some kids stared, and others pulled out their phones, but then the principal walked in. He tried talking, but I couldn't hear anything he said, and pointed at my ears and told him she took them, and I tried to mouth that I couldn't hear over and over, but he just looked at me, then at her, then asked her what happened while I stood there in silence, totally cut off from whatever story they were making about me. And someone finally handed me the devices and I clipped them back on, but my hands were still shaking and the principal told me they'd deal with it appropriately, and I thought that meant her, not me. But then he handed me a paper and told me I was suspended for escalating the situation and physically grabbing a teacher, and I just stood there. But when I got home, I told my dad everything, and he didn't say a word at first, but then he stood up and pulled out his phone and told me he was calling a lawyer, and told me he wasn't going to let them turn his son into the villain because someone didn't understand the difference between earbuds and assistive devices. The school said the teacher would be placed on leave while they reviewed the incident, but my suspension stayed on the record, and the vice principal told me I could avoid further penalties if I wrote an apology letter to the teacher, so I wrote it. And I did it because I wanted this nightmare to end, but I didn't sign it, and I don't know what to do.